Hello, my name is Tony Blomqvist and this is our fifth assignment for the C++ Object-Oriented Programming class. Um, Today we exercised with interfaces and abstract classes. Basically, we were making interfaces that the other classes could use in our game. So let's go look at what we have done. Our first assignment was to change the way the game's output, meaning text, was handled. Before we used a simple count from whichever class happened to need to output text, but this time we're using a new interface. We have an renderer.h with an I prefix for interface. Which basically accepts a string as reference and has an optional add new line value to it. And then there is another function which basically just adds a line break to make the text output look a bit cleaner. Right? So we have our text renderer, which actually then uses this iRenderer interface and applies, well, actually defines how it's used. So we accept a string, which we once again move to count, and assuming that add new line by default, of course, is enabled, we're also adding this new line character. And as well here we have add line break defined, which simply adds a new line break character. Right. Now my mouse is messing up. Okay, here we go. So how is this actually working then? Well, in game.header we have included a text renderer.h, which we create as an object. It's a class member, and in game.cpp we simply create it upon the constructor. We have it defined here. And then in the game we simply call mTextRenderer and use its render function to render whatever text we want to the screen. And here we have an example of the line break being used as well. And well then, that about covers the mTextRenderer. We are also allowing other classes to use it. For example, when we create the enemy object, we're passing the text renderer pointer to the enemy object, which the enemy code will then use here, like so. First, in the constructor, the text renderer is actually sent to the game object constructor here, and it's then used in code like this. So it's pretty much like the same with game CPP. We're storing it as a pointer and then just calling it as we need to. And once again, we simply have one mTextRender object that's being passed around as pointers. Another a lot more difficult assignment was making an abstract class for commands and using commands to handle user input and the actual functionality. And I have to admit I struggled with this a lot. Well, first of all, here we have our command class, which, to be honest, isn't an abstract class right now. It's simply a virtual, it's simply an interface, because I couldn't figure out what to do with I couldn't figure out what additional functionality I could have provided here to actually make it an abstract class. So yeah, I admit it's an interface. Anyway, we have here an execute, which takes a pointer to a game object. The reason why I wanted to use the game object is because pretty much all functionality relies on the information stored in the game class. For example, we will have commands like attack and search, which are very much tied to the variables that we are using in a game object. So I couldn't figure out of a better way to handle it than by using the game object itself. However, I had a lot of trouble with this because command objects, command class requires a game class because it's mentioned here, so I need to include it here. But as well, the game class should really understand what commands are. So we had a circular inclusion here, which was really tough to try to figure out. In the end, I had to take a shortcut, and my game.h actually doesn't define a command header, but simply uses it here later as inside the play function. I'm not really happy with this solution, but I really couldn't think of a better way. Right, so how is this command used then? We have our own command factory here. Pretty basic. It doesn't actually use this command interface here. It simply again takes a constructor to the game. The constructor takes a pointer to a game, and then we have our simple create command function. Create command here basically reads the user input like game.cpp previously used to, and transforms it to lowercase, and then depending on the input creates a new command which is stored as a class variable and is then handled assuming that it was a legal call. And basically once the command object is created, we simply call the execute method without caring about what kind of command object it was. This means that, for example, attack, which defines execute and is using the command interface, can be called, as well as our search, which again has an execute and uses the command interface. The actual code behind the attack and search CPPs are very simple. We have our default constructor and destructor, as well as the execute command, which simply tells, in this case, it tells that the player will attack the enemy. To be honest, I would think that there is some way to define the enemy attacking the player too, but I couldn't think of a good way to do it. Anyway, and our search code is pretty much taken from the previous code from GameCPP. We create a new instance of gold, get the gold factory pointer from the game class, and create random value to the gold, and then render what we have taken. In this case, we are not using our own text renderer, we're just borrowing the pointer from the game object, right? And right, the actual code in the game.cpp, so this hasn't changed a lot. We are just rendering text in a different way. Here we are creating the player as was suggested in our week 4 assignment, and here we handle the input. We pretty much read the user input, and then here we use the command factory and create a command, and the command factory handles the rest of it. So all of the user's input is handled by this and this line. And then here we have the enemy attacking, assuming that the game is still running. If the player kills the enemy, this will also handle the enemy die, the game closing when the enemy has died. So this shouldn't run when, well, it shouldn't. And yeah, the enemy attacking the player is still handled the good old-fashioned way. There is no command factory or commands used for it. I'm not sure if that was what we were after, but I kind of also imagine that command factory is primarily meant to handle the user input. So this week was pretty hard. I think I completely failed the idea of commands. It was somehow really hard to understand what the instructions really wanted when it came to the commands. It was really difficult to try to understand the concept and then apply it in some meaningful way. And then when I started having those include errors, I was getting really rather annoyed. But this is what we got for this week. Thank you.